Welcome to the Wander Mode podcast, where we celebrate the fearless spirit of women embracing life's wanderings. Where every story is a spark of inspiration and reminds us that sometimes the most beautiful moments happen when we simply embrace wherever the journey may lead. I chatted with someone who made taxes and budgeting sound interesting. I had the privilege of chatting with Sandra Morno, and she is a tax strategist for women, specifically women that are traveling and living abroad, but they have US-based businesses. Now, Sandra is an expat herself, and so we actually had a super interesting conversation about the places that she has also traveled to and lived, and where she has loved and maybe where she wouldn't necessarily move back to. I really hope that you enjoy this conversation and have the same takeaways that I did, which were taxes and budgeting are actually fun things to talk about. Hi, Sandra. So nice to chat with you on the podcast today. Although I would say that taxes are not my favorite topic. The fact that you help people with their taxes because they live outside the country, they're travelers at heart. I think you and I are going to jive really well in this conversation.
Thanks for having me, Julie. I'm excited to see how this conversation goes.
We were chatting a little bit before I clicked record about just the highs and lows of entrepreneurship. So I think that actually might be a really great place to start is where are you in your journey of entrepreneurship right now? And what did life look like prior to being an entrepreneur?
So I have been an entrepreneur for 15 years. So to think back before that, my resume. I've done some of everything. I bartended for several years. I worked for an indoor football team. I worked for an attorney. I worked at a call center. I did some of everything. And then in 2009, I actually hit rock bottom in 2009. I was living in Atlanta and just life got out of control. Me and my sister ended up losing everything and moving back to Miami. Thank God for our parents. Kind of, sort of, because my mom still wanted rent. And I was just like, well, I don't have no money. How does that work? But anyways, that's kind of when I fell into taxes. I had a fraternity brother who had an accounting firm, and I was going to grad school because I really wanted to be a sports agent. And so I was going to school during the day and I was doing taxes at night. And that's how I kind of fell into what I am doing still today. But honestly, the first couple of years, I did not like it. I was like, oh, this is so boring. Numbers. I don't want to do this. What's the point of it all? And he became my mentor. He saw something in me and was just like, you're good at this. Use it to your advantage. See where it can take you. And he was right. Like, it's afforded me the opportunity to work remote and work from anywhere, like 15 plus years later. And so I'm grateful for it. I'm thankful that he saw something in me.
I think for anyone who has left the nest, so to speak, it's always that idea of like thankful that you have a home or a person to come back to, but also very humbling to have to go back home and say like, okay, I need to pick up the pieces and restart. What would you say were some of your biggest takeaways from hitting rock bottom there and having to kind of refigure things out that you still probably carry with you today?
I really had to learn to look around and assess my environment, right? I was doing too much and not making enough, but I was still kind of just like, okay, this is going to work out. This is going to work out. Instead of realizing, no, you're just drowning. It's not going to get better. And like you said I so had to humble myself. I did not want to go back because I didn't want to hear anyone say, you failed. You're back here, you're starting over, which is what I had to do actually when I got back. My mom was just yapping like, look at you, you couldn't make it. Now you're back here and you're starting over. But when I got back, it gave me such a drive because I literally had to start over. I had to raise money to get a car because no one was helping me. My sister, thank God, would let me use her car. My mom would not. I ended up buying a car on Craigslist for like $3,000. And that car lasted me 8 to 9 years. And I was so thankful, but it gave me grit. Right? It made me realize if I fall, I can get back up as long as I just keep going. I gotta keep moving. I can't wallow in the failure or I can't wallow in that season. So I look back at those times a lot. Being an entrepreneur, you have your ups and your downs. Like I was telling you, there's some days I'm like, I don't want to do this no more. I'm going to go bartend, like, and just make drinks for people and make them feel happy and have my little cash income. So I learned a lot from that. And I always think about that, how it made me stronger and how to reassess how I look at failure.
Especially with bartending. And one of the things that I hear is that people can just make so much money with tips. One of the things that's really humbling as an entrepreneur is you have a lot of days where you're not making anything. I mean,
Exactly.
there's nothing coming in, but you're having to spend money to make money, right? Like hiring a coach or investing in those social media ads or whatever it is that you have to spend money on, but you don't have anything coming in. I can see how that would help your mindset of like, okay, I've been here before. I've been in this struggle before. And so I can find a way out. And
Yeah.
here's what I need to do.
Yeah. And I think now that I'm such a numbers geek, like budgeting is so important. Like I know people don't like that word. Okay, let's call it a spending plan, but you have to have an idea of where your money's going, right? So perfect example, COVID. I knew so many people that were just so into their numbers, right? They're just like, well, I have Netflix, I have Hulu, I have this, I have that. They cut all that stuff and they were able to save $150 to $200 a month. I think more of us need to live like that on a daily basis, not when we have an emergency. My budget, I live by it. And some days, yes, I do go over it, but I make sure that I stick to that budget.
Do you think it's because over time, everything's now on a credit card? Like, what are your thoughts there? Like, why are we so disconnected from what we spend in accounts and money waste?
Because it's like you said, we have plastic. It's instant gratification. Instead of us sitting back and thinking, oh, do I need to buy that jacket? Can I really afford it? We're like, oh, let me just put it on this card and keep it moving. And we pay these crazy interest amounts, right? And then that's why people are so. I was reading a post that said there is so much credit card debt right now that it's just absolutely ridiculous because everyone's just kind of swiping, even though they don't have it. Now, there are situations where, okay, this is needed, but a lot of the times it's just a want, right? And so we need to kind of, I don't know, we need just to rethink things. Like, do I really have this cash? If I do, I'll use the cash. Like me, I use everything on credit, but I pay it all off in that month because I want those points because that could mean a flight. So there's a strategy behind my craziness. But most of the time, people are just swiping just to swipe, and we got to do better.
And I think, too, to your point, you can spend on credit to have those advantages, point systems toward hotels or rental cars or travel or whatever, free gas or whatever thing that it is that you're trying to save points for, use points for. But so many people forget that you have to have the income or the money behind that spend to still pay for that. It's delayed.
Yeah.
But at some point that's all going to come due. Did you find that when you started budgeting, what was the easiest system for you to use? Or was it a software? Or was it just tracking on a piece of paper, a spreadsheet? What do you advise there for people who are not great budgeters?
I'm old school. I use a spreadsheet. Like I am still in Excel to this day. And it's so funny because my one sheet goes back like 3 years. So I can see kind of like, oh, well, how much was I spending a year ago? How much was I making a year ago? To me, that's the easiest thing when it comes to budgeting. Now, when it comes to like accounting and keeping up with my expenses and income, I use Wave Apps. It's WAVEAPPS.com. They have a free version and then they have like a $16 a month version. Super simple. It's not like QuickBooks because QuickBooks can be overwhelming and I am not a fan of QuickBooks. So I tell people, hey, let's start with something easy so you can understand what you're looking at. So those are the two things that I use.
Okay. And with a spreadsheet, because I'm assuming you don't even have to make it complicated, it's literally just tracking your income and expenses, right? And then just in tracking those expenses, you start to become a lot more aware of where there's waste.
Right. And so usually what I do is like I have an actual budget and then at the end of the month, I'm like, oh, what did I really spend? Did I stay under? Did I go over? So that I can kind of course correct for the following month. And so, yeah, it's super simple. Excel is easy, right? Because it can total up. You can put things in place. So like, I love it. Like, and I check my budget once a week just to see where I'm heading and what I need to not do for the following month.
I love that because I recently realized I'm spending $7 to $8 on this coffee every day when I'm dropping my daughter off. And when you actually start to add that up, I realized like, okay, if it was a decision for me between hundreds of dollars on coffee out each month or a trip or an excursion on a trip or whatever the thing is that I want, like what would my decision be?
I mean, and that's the thing, it's those little things, right? Like a couple of years ago, I used to talk about money leaks. And that's a perfect example, right? We don't realize where we're leaking money, like subscriptions or the gym that we haven't been to in 6 months. We done gave them all this money for Starbucks coffee, like you said. And it's not until you are in that entrepreneur mode and you're just like, wait, I just spent $300 on what? Like I could have had a
Yes.
VA. Like your mind thinks differently as an entrepreneur when it comes to money because it's like you said, it's all on you. There's no W-2 income.
If you don't want to go back to that job no matter what, that is your option. You can't control how it is bringing in money all the time as an entrepreneur. You can hope to get clients, you can put yourself out there on social media, but there is no guarantee that that client is going to come to the door and you're going to make money that day. There's a lot of days you're not making money. And so what can you control? Well, I can control where I'm spending then so that that's money, to your point, I could spend on a VA or I can outsource my social media or I can then stretch this a little bit longer before I would have to consider going back to a job or getting a part-time position to make it. Who as an entrepreneur do you specifically serve? Like who do you want to work with?
They're women entrepreneurs with US-based businesses and they're living and traveling abroad. I started traveling myself January 2021 and seeing, hey, I need to figure out how to make this my home office in this Airbnb because it's not really my home, but it is my home. Like, do I write off this meeting? Can I write off this transportation in this cab? And me as a tax person, I was just like, oh gosh, there's a lot I need to kind of keep track of, right? And also my days outside of the country. And when I just had a light bulb moment last year when I was in Colombia and I was meeting people who hadn't filed taxes. And I was just like, wait, what? So I realized that, okay, I need to help these women because I don't think they realize that as a US citizen, you still need to file taxes and you have a business. So there's even more involved in that. So let's see how I can help them save and take the anxiety out of taxes because like you said, no one really likes taxes. It's just one of those things that are just like, do I have to do this? And so my whole goal is to help ease the process, make it a little bit less stressful.
And it seems like the ideal client really for you because you have also been doing this for a long time. So take me back a little bit to 2021 when you started doing that. Like what was your reason for wanting to live abroad? And then it sounds like you started figuring out, okay, I need to figure out how to do this and be legal and all of those types of things. Was it hard for you? Were there a lot of hoops to jump through or is the information fairly readily available?
Because I've been doing business taxes for so long, I knew there are certain things that are still going to be the same, right? It's just figuring out how to calculate my home office, for example, right? It's going to be this little desk right here. Let me figure out the square footage. But honestly, I started it because tired of the rat race. Like in 2018 is when I woke up one day and living in Houston. And I was just like, I don't want to do this anymore. I feel like the harder I work, I don't see me getting ahead. I'm living a decent life, but I want more. There has to be more than this. Even as an entrepreneur, I had a lot of freedom, but I was just like, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to make my money stretch. And so I was having conversations with people. One of my friends was like, well, you can go to Thailand. I was like, man, that's far. But they were like, you could live as like a queen. But I was like, that's far, And then, life kind of happened. I ended up having to move back home again. I've had quite a few failures. And then COVID happened. I was texting a friend. It was September 2020. I will never forget. Like I had just had like not a great discussion with my mother. And I was just like, oh my gosh, okay, Lord, I'm not trying to go to jail. But this lady is really pushing me. And she was telling me how she was going to Mexico for a month because she could work remote. And I was just like, oh, that's a really good idea. So I just jumped on that trip with her, ended up in Playa del Carmen, Mexico for a month. After that month, I came back and I was just like, okay, yeah, I don't want to live in the United States anymore. I want to live abroad. It was so different. I didn't have to get in a car to drive. I was always walking, or I could catch an Uber or a cab. I was meeting other people from the United States. I was eating better, sleeping better. It was just a different type of lifestyle. And that is what I wanted. And so since then, I've just kind of been seeing how this is going to work because I love Latin America. And so I'm sticking to this time zone, which is not too far or too crazy. That's kind of how it got started.
Out of curiosity, more for like the lifestyle perspective, do you like picking a spot and then staying there for several months at a time or a year at a time? Or do you have a vision of these set places that I kind of want to be and I'm going to do sort of a rotation type of schedule?
I have just been going with the flow. Honestly, like perfect example when I was in Colombia, I had been there for 6 months. People were talking about Argentina. Oh, you should go check it out. And I was just like, ooh, it wasn't really on my map, but okay, I have nothing else to do. Ended up in Argentina for 5 months. I've just been kind of going with the flow, right? And I'm kind of a slow traveler. I want to do 3 to 6 months in a place because I want to really get a feel of the place and see if I like it. Do I want to come back? Do I want to make it home?
Some ways it's the brilliance of what you're doing is that it gives you so much more perspective and being in a place longer. My husband and I love to travel, but we're never really anywhere for more than a week, maybe 2 weeks at a time. And it can give you, you're dipping your toe in the water, but you're very much in this tourist mindset. You're not really seeing it for what the life is that's kind of behind all of the action, so to speak. So you're really able to see culturally, does this align with what I want? From an activities perspective, am I meeting people so that I feel connected, that sort of thing? Have you been to Chile yet?
I haven't, but now I know someone there. So I'm just okay, Santiago, Chile is on the list when it's warm. I don't do the cold. So I will eventually make it there.
I'm going to totally butcher the name on it, but my husband and I went down there and we hiked around Torres del Paine. It's like a national park down there. And there's this hike called the W. And let me tell you, I have never, like, my eyes had a hard time comprehending and like taking in the beauty of what was there. So like, you're gonna have to let me know if you make it down that way. And if you like hiking and those hut to hut trekking types of things, like, don't miss it. It's like well worth it.
Okay. I remember that.
So then you work with female entrepreneurs specifically to help them understand legally what they need to do to operate a business outside of the United States. So tell me a little bit about the logistics from your perspective on understanding laws with that. Do all the laws tie back to because it's a US based business, that's sort of all that matters? Or is it dependent on the location that they're choosing to live as well?
It's dependent upon the location that they're choosing because we need to see if the U.S. has a treaty with them. We need to kind of understand some of the tax laws, but there are a couple of laws that trump everywhere we go, right? Like, so there's something called the foreign earned income exclusion. So if you're outside of the United States for more than 330 days, you can actually use that exclusion, which will allow you to exclude up to $126,000 of your income. Earned income. Let me say that, not passive, but earned income. So you have that one. And then there's the foreign tax credit, which is like if you're paying taxes in another country, we can actually use that foreign tax credit so you're not double taxed, right? So you're not paying $10,000 here and $10,000 in the United States, right? So there's things that are available. Those are the two main ones that people want to be on lookout for if they're living outside of the US.
So then as they're running this business, they're recognizing, all right, I need to have a better understanding of how I'm impacted. They would come to you and you would walk them through a system or a process based on where they're located and what they do to help them maximize their dollars virtually and like making sure that they're saving where they can save and keep as much of their earnings as possible.
That's right. That's right. And that's why I work with women all year long instead of just tax season, right? Because as someone living abroad, your 330 days doesn't have to be a calendar year. Like my calendar year for the foreign earned income exclusion just started 3 weeks ago. So my calendar year is going to be September 2024 to September 2025. And so now I'm counting my days, like making sure I'm not in the US, but I'm traveling to other places. I'm keeping track. So that's why I work with people all year long so that we can see like, okay, what's the strategy? What are we doing? Are you writing off this ticket of you going to another country, right? To make sure that they're getting the maximum savings that they can.
And I could see how you would have to do that from a yearly process, because if you don't put certain things in place in order to avoid whatever the thing is anyways, or you haven't tracked certain things, by the time you get around to even submitting your taxes, it's too late. Like you've missed your window, sort of, so to speak, right?
You know what? It's extensions and it's people waiting until October. And now we're scrambling. We're being reactive. Let's go back to your bank statements and see what you wrote off. So that's why I just like, it's all about being proactive with your taxes, right? Staying on top of it, checking it, or having someone else check it. If you don't want to do it, fine. Get a bookkeeper that checks your numbers every quarter, right? Just to make sure that you're on top of your game. Because in the tax world, once December 31st comes, like a lot of these strategies we can't implement in the following year because the tax year is legally over. There's only a handful of things and they can't help you that much.
Out of curiosity, is there a basic number of days or months that you have to be operating your business outside of the United States to even cue some of these considerations? Or is it just in any amount of operating your business outside of the United States would indicate that these are things that you should be paying attention to?
It has to be at least 330 days. That's when you're going to trigger in the foreign earned income exclusion. There are some exceptions, but let's just go with top level because I don't want to confuse people. And even if you come to the United States for a couple of days, that's fine. But like I tell people, hey, try to be outside of the US at least 330 days. Then you're good. And you trigger in the foreign earned income exclusion. And then you might be able to use the foreign housing deduction or exclusion. So there's a lot of things that help you not get double taxed if you're living outside of the US.
And with those days, would that be consecutive? Like you wouldn't even be allowed to come back and visit, or would visits be excluded?
No, visits are excluded. So you take the whole calendar year, right? You take 365 days. And as long as you're gone 330 days out of that 365, you're good. So you can come back and visit for a week at a time or 2 weeks or a month. But then just know that that month is it. Like, don't come back until those 65 days are over and you've met that criteria.
Okay. So how does this work from like a citizenship perspective of just living outside of the United States? I know a lot of countries are no longer allowing for dual citizenship, even if you're choosing to work within a country, that sort of thing. How does that impact citizenship?
So as long as you're a U.S. citizen, you're going to have to file U.S. taxes. The only way to get out around that is to just renounce your citizenship, which I tell people not to do that, but that's a personal choice, right? And then you can become a citizen of the UK if you want to do that, or these other countries. But a lot of expats, you end up getting a residency or a visa. So then you'll have to file taxes in both countries, right? Depending on the country, they may not care. But like Mexico, you still have to file a tax return, right? Because now you've been here more than 6 months and they consider you a resident. So you'd file a Mexican tax return and you'd also need to file the US tax return.
That makes sense. I agree with you. Like, I think giving up your citizenship, no matter what country you're coming from, is a pretty big decision. You would want to be pretty confident that you were ready to let go of that home base. Yeah. With states, because I have other friends who are entrepreneurs, one of which actually lives on the road most of the time, like in an RV. Have you found that there are any advantages for people on establishing their address within a state that doesn't do income tax, or would that actually not be possible because you're not living in that state?
I tell people, hey, if you live in a state that has state tax, try to get like a virtual mailbox and go to a state that does not have state taxes. Texas is very simple to get an address or residency. Because the thing is, you just want to have a U.S. address, right? The IRS just wants to know you still have a U.S. physical address. You still want to keep your U.S. bank accounts. You still want to have some type of presence there because if something should happen, they can still contact you, right? Or if they need to send you money, you still have a U.S. bank account. Like I was told during COVID, a lot of people got rid of their U.S. bank accounts, got foreign bank accounts, and then weren't able to get like the stimulus. And I was just like, oh, that sucks. So that's why I'm just like, you can get other foreign bank accounts, but keep those U.S. based bank accounts, keep a U.S. based address, and find a state that doesn't have state taxes. Because you don't want to pay state and federal, and you're not even living here. Come on now. Like, who wants to do that?
Right. Yeah. I mean, even living here, I mean, it really stinks to live in a state that has high income taxes. We're in Minnesota, and I think we're seriously like one of the highest income tax states in the US. Like, it's pretty high. Yeah. And then my parents live in Washington state where it's no income tax. And we've spent a lot of time in Montana, and we've even contemplated like, okay, do we go move to Montana and live there as our home base? But then you get into the whole, like, we have a kid and now whatever state you're in, then she's only eligible to go to public school in it just
Right.
like it's complicated,
Yeah.
as is anything with money. Going to the side of building this business and working with other female entrepreneurs, how has that process been for you? Because you're so knowledgeable and you've had so much life experience with this, doing it personally. But how has the building the business side gone in terms of seeking out those clients, finding them, networking, that kind of stuff?
You know what? It's been so interesting. I think more women relate to me because they see me traveling. I think that's what gets them first, right? Like they'll go to my LinkedIn profile and they'll read it and they're like, huh, okay, she's not all like taxes. And then they'll see my story from Argentina or Peru. And I think that draws them to me. Because honestly, that's one of the main things I want. I want more of us to travel. I want more women to travel, to take time for themselves. I don't care if it's a road trip, a weekend trip, just do it. Just see what it's like because it could change your life. And it changed my life. And so they come to me based on that. Oh my gosh, I love what you do. And then they ask about the taxes. So it's interesting how everything's led by the travel first and then the taxes come later. Um, so that's how I've kind of been growing slowly but surely. People are seeing me. I'm sharing what I can in an easy, simple way, and it makes them feel confident. Like, oh, okay, I can do this. But if I can't, I'm coming to you. So I'm enjoying seeing the brand grow.
It's what you often hear business coaches talk about, which is you have to build that know, like, and trust factor first. And that really it has nothing to do with the business that you're building. It has everything to do with who you are and how you put yourself and your energy out into the world. And that's what people are going to connect with first. And they don't actually care about what your offers are or whatever. It's more that they care about you as a person. And then it's like, oh, and
Right.
she could help me with this.
Right.
Now, have you found that compared to, let's just say, having an office space that you work out of as a tax consultant, have you found the virtual aspect to give you any challenges from people feeling concerned about their financial security or giving private information virtually to you?
Not anymore. I mean, I think after COVID, people got a lot more laxed, right? So they're just like, how do you want this information? I still have a client who still faxes me his information, even though I have a secure portal. I'm like, all you got to do is just upload this. It's easy peasy. He's just like, no, what's the fax number again? And I'm like, okay, this is what we're doing. But because so much identity theft and all the things that are going on, the IRS makes sure that we have certain portals that are secure just for this client. No one else can tap into it. So I always make sure that that is a thing because I know there's a lot of craziness out here. Like even when people try to email me stuff, I'm like, no, delete this. We are not doing this. People can tap into emails. And so I'm really strict about how they send me information. And most of my clients, I've had them for 10 plus years, a lot of them. And so they're confident in what I do. If they have questions, they know they can reach out to me with a phone call, a Zoom call, whatever the case may be. And we make sure that all their information is secure.
What would be maybe like 2 to 3 recommendations that you would say if you want to keep yourself safer in that space? These are some things that you definitely should not be doing.
One of the most important things, it's not even about your wage and income, right? It's the fact that you're giving somebody your date of birth and your social and your name. You already know that's the basis for everything that we do, right? They can even make up an address and get away with that. So I try to tell people if you're working with someone face to face, you ask them, hey, well, what are you going to do with this information afterwards? How do I know that it's safe? And ask them what their process is. I work with one other person and I've known her over a decade and I trust her with my life. And that's another thing with what I do. I can't just have anyone come in and do this work because you have access to way too much information. And so it's just one of those things you want to ask questions who you're working with, like how are they going to use this information? What's going to happen with this information? I rather someone give me their information virtually than hand it over because what am I doing with this afterwards? I'm going to give it back to you or I'm going to shred it. In this day in the virtual age, I think just asking questions, try not to have things emailed to you from your tax preparer, like see if there's another aspect of it, or if it is, make sure that there's an extra security code to get into this tax return. So you just want to have those 1-2 steps, like nowadays, like in our email. Okay, well, is this really you? Can you let me text you this code and get into, you want to just make sure that you have an extra layer of protection. I don't know if I answered that question, but like, hopefully I did.
Yeah. See, and this is the funny thing. I'm not one of those people that I would say is super particular or like probably overly careful with what it is that I'm putting out there. And I know even in the world now of Chat GPT and different things, there's more and more information coming to light of like you're putting your information about your business out into this Chat GPT thing, which can be like that's shared information. And you're teaching AI to recognize different things and you're handing over permission to access different things that you think in your mind, like, oh, it's private, it's on my own desktop or whatever. And so I think oftentimes it's like, it's just, we become so acclimated to technology can do all these amazing things. Yes. But there's also this other side of technology that I think sometimes we forget about the permissions that we're giving.
You're right. We are in a day and age. If you think about it, there's been more data breaches in the last 2-3 years than there has been in the last decade. And it's because of technology, right? Because I'm like, well, why are there so many data breaches? Now I'm afraid to give anybody any of my information. Like I even go to the doctor's office and I throw off like my social because I'm like, what do you need my social for? Like,
Yes, yes. This might be a good question to end on, but what would your advice be to somebody who is considering becoming an expat and she owns her own business? What advice would you give in that journey?
do your research. And I'm saying this from personal experience. I have been one of those people, like perfect example, Argentina. People are like, oh, just go there. And I went there and I was just like, oh, it's cold. And why is there dookie everywhere on the floor? Like it was a crazy experience, right? So do your research. There's plenty of Facebook groups. You can find out what it's really like before you get on a 10-hour flight like I did and go live somewhere for like 5 months. I made the best of it. Do your research, find community. That is so super important. Honestly, if I didn't know one or two people in every place that I've been, I probably wouldn't have gone because it's a lonely road doing this as a single woman. Like if you have a family, that's a totally different thing, right? But find community, find out the cost of living and what else. I think I would say really track your expenses and your income to the point of no return. Like you're going to have to be extra anal because you're in another country and you need to figure out what it is that you can and can't write off, right? So I think those are the 3 or 4 things I would suggest for someone who's going that route. And I'm always a resource. Like, so when people come to me and tell me I'm thinking about traveling, I'm like, okay, where do you want to go? Like, I'm excited to hear that. So if they want to reach out to me, that's another aspect as well.
Have you found specific online communities that have been particularly helpful that we could link to in the show notes?
But it all depends on where you're going, right? Because like here, I'm in Mexico, I'm in Puerto Mexico, and there's like 5 or 6 different Facebook groups. Some of them have WhatsApp groups and they actually have meetups. So it just really depends on where you're going. That's why I say do the research, see how big the community is, see if there's other women you can connect with and kind of go from there.
Okay, perfect. Where is the best place to go, whether it's social or email, to find you?
The best place to go is LinkedIn. I'm the only Sandra Morno, and I send people there because they can get a feel of who I am, right? They can kind of read through my posts, see what I'm talking about, because maybe you'll like me and maybe you won't. So I tell people go to LinkedIn, check me out, send me a DM, connect with me, and we can kind of go from there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. This was so informative and so fun to talk travel and taxes. I actually learned a lot and I was intrigued, which again, I'm not a money person, so that says a lot.
Thank you so much for having me. This is such a good conversation. Like we talked about a lot.
Thanks for wandering with me today. If you were inspired by this episode and think it would ignite a spark in a friend, don't hesitate to share. And if you're craving more from the Wander Mode community, hop on over to Instagram at WanderModeCo. Meet you in the next episode, and until then, wander on.